Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van. Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing, and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man.
Postman Pat has the best village. It was a lovely summer morning in Greendale. Pat had finished delivering the village letters. He met Mrs. Pottage and Mrs. Thompson. "Morning, all. What a day," said Pat.
"Morning, Pat," said Mrs. Thompson. "Just the weather to make the garden grow."
When Pat arrived at the post office, he said, "Well, everything seems to be growing in here. I've never seen so many flowers. I wonder where Mrs. Goggins is. She must be here somewhere." In came Sam Waldron with his arms full of flowers. "Hello, Sam," said Pat. "More flowers? There'll soon be no room for letters. Now, there's a nice blossom. Oh, it's Mrs. Goggins."
"Now then," said Sam, "I'll just put them here till you decide where you want them. I hope I've not brought too many."
"Oh, Sam," said Mrs. Goggins, "we'll need a lot more if we're going to win the competition."
"Never you fear," said Sam. "There are plenty more. Thanks to Alf's compost, my garden's teeming with flowers."
"What's this competition you're on about?" said Pat.
"Oh, Pat, you must have heard about it," said Mrs. Goggins.
"The best village competition, of course," said Sam.
"And it's sponsored by the Royal Mail," said Mrs. Goggins. "So we'll have to do our best. I'm going to cover this old post office with flowers."
"I wondered what was going on," said Pat. "I never saw Greendale look so bright. I thought it was just the nice weather. I suppose there'll be some judges coming to pick the winner."
"Yes," said Sam, "but nobody knows when they're coming. It'll be a surprise, just to keep us on our toes. I'll be off for some more flowers now. Cheerio."
"Well, I'd better get on with the post," said Pat. "Flowers or no flowers."
"Oh, Pat," said Mrs. Goggins, "when you call at Greendale Farm with that parcel, will you collect something for me? Mrs. Pottage promised me some tubs to put the flowers in outside the shop."
"I'll remember. Don't worry," said Pat. "No trouble. With all this sprucing up going on, I'll not be able to forget. Bye." Pat bumped into a ladder leaning against the wall outside.
"Whoops! Oi! Look out!"
shouted Ted Glenn. "Hello, Ted. What are you doing up there?" said Pat.
"Just giving it a spot of fresh paint, the nose, for this here competition. It's grand stuff, this new paint. You can put it anywhere."
Ted seemed to be splashing paint all over the place. "Yes, I've noticed," said Pat. "Yon letterbox seems to have come out in spots."
"Aye, it flies about a bit,"
said Ted.
"It'll come off with a bit of a rub."
"I don't know about best village competition," said Pat. "I reckon they should call it the busiest village competition." Then Pat caught sight of his van. It was covered with spots of paint. "Oh, my van! It's caught the measles."
"Eh, dear," said Ted. "Now, I don't know how that's happened. It does look a bit sickly. You'd best take it to see the doctor."
"It's your blooming paint," said Pat. You're meant to paint the post office, not every mortal thing for miles round.
It needs a drop of water to get it off, said Ted. Drop in at my place before yon paint dries, and I'll give it a good hosing down. That van will be as good as new.
We'd better get a move on then, said Pat. There was even a speck of paint on Jess's nose. Look at your nose, Jess, said Pat. You'd better watch out. Ted'll be giving you a hose down if he sees that. It was time for a quick cat lick. Pat went to Greendale Farm first to get those tubs and to give Mrs. Pottage her letters.
The tubs are just over by the barn, Pat, said Mrs. Pottage. But keep a watch out for any strange plants you might see.
There were some very odd blooms in the tubs. They looked rather like two small twins holding twigs. Goodness me, said Pat. A greater flowering Katy and a giggling Tom tree. What will Mrs. Pottage grow next?
Hello, Pat, said Katy. We're talking plants as well. And we can help you to put our tubs in your van, said Tom.
They're a good weight, though, said Pat. I hope you're strong plants.
Has your van got spots? said Katy.
Well, it looks like it, said Pat. I think I'd better take it to see Dr. Glenn for a good dose of water medicine before these spots dry on. And here's some sweet medicine for you. Pat gave them a toffee each.
Oh, thanks, Pat.
Goodbye,
Goodbye,
said Katy and Tom.
Pat was on his way. The sun was drying the van's spots. Would he be in time? Ted had the hosepipe ready for him.
Hey, I thought you'd forgotten, said Ted. I hope that paint hasn't dried, or we'll never get it off. I'll have to be quick then, Oz. I've got to get down to Pencaster Station the day after tomorrow to catch the train to Scotland.
Where are you off to, Ted?
It's young Caroline's wedding. I cannot miss that. And there's all sorts to do before I go. I'll have to press me best suit for a start. And I can't leave Mrs. Goggins with that hole in her roof. One summer shower and she'll be washed out of bed. Anyway, I've got Peter Fogg lined up to give me a lift to the station on his motorbike. He can get a move on.
Ted sluiced water all over the van.
It'll be a day or two before I get back, he said, and I don't want to leave the lorry down at the station. It might disappear. So I'll leave it in the village when I've finished Mrs. Goggins' roof. And then you'll be able to keep an eye on it for me.
Ted wiped the van dry and gave it a good polishing. Good idea, said Pat. Have a good time at the wedding, and thanks for cleaning the van up. It looks grand now. Cheerio. The next day the village was covered in flowers. There were tubs and baskets in every street and window boxes on every window. Someone had even filled a wheelbarrow with flowers. Any time now the judges would arrive to choose the best village. Very early in the morning, the phone rang in Pat's house. Sarah answered it.
Hello? Yes? Oh, are you sure? Is it Ted's? Certain? Oh, you'd know it anywhere. A sight for sore eyes. And what's it doing there? Just sitting there looking ugly. Oh, dear. And the judges? You've seen them on their way? Oh, goodness, all that work making the village beautiful, it'll all be wasted. I'll tell Pat. I'm sure he'll think of something. Yes, right now. I'll tell him to hurry.
Sarah shouted for Pat.
Pat! Pat, quick, it's terrible!
"What's up? Nobody hurt, I hope," shouted Pat as he was tying up his bootlaces.
No, said Sarah, but Ted's left his old lorry right by the village green. The judges are coming to pick the winner for the competition, and it'll be the first thing they see. They'll never give us the prize then. It's such an ugly thing, they'll not notice all the lovely flowers.
"That's easy," said Pat. "We'll ask him to move it. I expect he's gone to mend Mrs. Goggins' roof."
No, he's not at Mrs. Goggins, said Sarah, and nobody can find him. His workshop's locked and empty.
"Oh, now I remember," said Pat. "He's gone to Scotland to Caroline's wedding. I meant to tell you. Yes, he's going to be away for 2 or 3 days, he said. I'd better go and see what I can do." Pat got on his bike and whizzed off to the village. The lorry was still by the village green, just as Sarah had said, with Peter Fogg and Mr. Pringle scratching their heads. They had tried to move it, but it was locked up, with the brakes firmly on, and they could not budge it. "Oh, it's such a pity," said Mr. Pringle, "right by that village green. The judges simply cannot miss it."
"Here comes more trouble,"
said Peter Fogg. P.C. Selby rode up on his bike.
"Now then, what's going on? Parked vehicle on the highway?"
Peter Fogg and Mr. Pringle explained to P.C. Selby about the lorry and the judges.
"Let's have a look then,"
said P.C. Selby, getting his notebook out.
"Seems quite safe to me. And parking is allowed here. Not part of the highway. Quite legal. Can't do anything to move it. What do you reckon, Pat?"
Pat had met Major Forbes at the post office, and he told him what had happened as they hurried to the green.
"Tell you what, sort of thing we did in my army days," said the Major. "Only one way. Cover it up. Hide it. Camouflage, that's the word."
When Major Forbes saw the parked lorry, he shouted,
"Into action!"
and began telling everyone what to do. Alf came with his tractor and trailer to give a hand, and Peter Fogg loaded it up with more flowers and pots and shrubs. It was soon full. They all helped. Miss Hubbard came with yet more plants on her bike. And Dorothy Thompson found a big roll of pretend grass made of cloth.
"Well done, everybody. Keep it up,"
shouted the Major. They draped the imitation grass over the lorry, making it look like a green hillock. They put the shrubs on, then the flower pots, and a bit of fencing to make it look like a garden. Where did they get that from? Later that day, the phones were ringing again all over Greendale. Dorothy Thompson's phone went first.
Hello? What? Who? Ah! Miss Hubbard, have you heard? We've won.
Won? Said Miss Hubbard. Did you say we've won the best village competition?
The Reverend Timms heard the news on the vicarage phone.
"Lord bless us, what wonderful news!"
Mrs. Pottage ran out to the meadow to tell the twins.
Well, twins, our tubs must have helped. We've won after all.
Dr. Gilbertson was just putting the phone down at the surgery.
Yippee! I knew we could do it.
Mrs. Goggins was talking to Pat at the post office.
Well, isn't that just marvellous news, Pat? That'll put Greendale on the front page of the Pencaster Gazette. You never know. We might even be on the television. I hear that the judges liked best of all the special hillock covered with lovely flowers on the village green. Now, I never knew we had any such hillock in the village.
Well, it won't be there too long, said Pat, so you'd better get a good look at it. Yes, the judges couldn't believe their eyes. They came back twice to have another look. P.C. Selby was chatting to the Major in the street.
A day to remember,
He smiled.
it certainly was, said the Major.
When Ted came back from the wedding, he couldn't find his lorry.
Has anybody seen my lorry?
He said.
I left it by the village green before I went to Scotland, and it's nowhere to be found now. I think it must have been stolen.
Aye, you want to be careful, said P.C. Selby, leaving unattended vehicles to the danger of the public. Could be an offence, you know. I might have to impose a fine. Let's see if I have a note of any stolen vehicles.
Major Forbes came along with a big grin on his face.
Well, I don't see what's so funny,
said Ted. P.C. Selby riffled through his notebook.
No, not a thing. Nothing about a parked lorry. Only a new hill that appeared from nowhere, and a lot of flowers that covered it, as if by magic.
He nudged the Major, and they fell about laughing.
Ho, 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 said the Major. A magic lorry that turned into a bunch of flowers, what?
Will someone please tell me what the joke is,
said Ted.
and what's happened to my lorry, and what's all this about flowers?
He didn't find his lorry until Pat arrived with his letters. Have a good look at the magic hillock, said Pat.
It's very nice, said Ted, but I want my lorry.
Look a bit closer, said Pat. Ted still didn't know the secret. Then Pat lifted the edge of the grass to show a wheel of the lorry peeping out. Oh, what a surprise Ted had. He laughed as much as anyone. Ted cleared the flowers from the windscreen and drove the magic hillock home. He planted the flowers in his garden. To this day, Ted has one of the best gardens in Greendale, and people come from miles about to see it.
Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat and his black and white cat. All the birds are singing and the day is just beginning. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Pat feels he's a really happy man. Pat feels he's a really happy